What is up, guys? Today I want to show you how to install some aftermarket sway bars on your ND Miata. Now we got these from Flyin Miata, and these have multiple holes here on the outside to adjust where the end links go. So these sway bars are adjustable, and changing which position you put the end link in will change the effective stiffness of the sway bar. So I'm also going to show you how we're going to set this up and what the difference of those holes is. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting with the rear sway bars, the first thing you want to do is disconnect the sway bar end links from the sway bar itself, and then loosen the nuts on the brackets so that way we could take the entire sway bar off. Once all those nuts are removed, the sway bar should pop right off, and then you can just slide it around the exhaust. You also do not need to remove the rear wheel. I only did this for easier access with my power tools, and then also easier access for filming. All right, now with the stock rear sway bar removed, we'll line it up against the Flyin Miata sway bar here, and you can really see the difference in the thickness between the two bars. The OEM one is a lot thinner, way more flexible, so we should see a big difference with this Flyin Miata bar. This also gives us an opportunity to see where we need to put the new brackets and bushings onto the Flyin Miata bar, so we want to line those up pretty much exactly where they are on the OEM bar. Additionally, when we line them up together, you can see that the mounting hole here for the stock sway bar is pretty much identical in placement to the middle hole here on the Flyin Miata bar. Again, these are adjustable, so we can make them stiffer or looser depending on where we mount that end link, and we're going to use the middle position for now. Reason being, if we went to the more outside position, that's going to give the effect of loosening this sway bar, make it feel less stiff, and we definitely want to feel the full effects of it, so we're going to put it in the middle position. That way it's identical as stock, and the only difference is the thickness of the bar. If we went to this position here that's closer and we made the bar stiffer, we might introduce some unwanted and excessive oversteer characteristics into the Miata here, which is not what we want. So we're going to start out with this middle position, and of course we can always adjust it further as need be. Additionally, the other thing that's important to note is the orientation of the bar. So you see how this end here has a little bit of a bend to it. It's kind of angled like this. You want this top edge of this flat face here pointing towards the middle of the car when you install the sway bar. All right, now to install these bushings and brackets, they come apart just like this, and then the bushing itself does have a little slit cut into it. So you can see there, that's how we're going to fit it around the sway bar. Now, before we install this, we need to put some grease on the inside of the bushing. We do this so that way it doesn't bind the bushing whenever the sway bar is in action, and then also hopefully we will not get any sort of squeaking noises as we go over bumps and variations in the road. So that's definitely the tricky part, is trying to get this bushing onto the sway bar. When I apply the grease, I'm going to apply it to the side that's opposite that little slit in the bushing, so that way it hopefully creates a little bit less mess. And then I'm just going to rotate around a few times to make sure that all of that grease gets distributed evenly between the sway bar itself and this bushing, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now to install the new sway bar, we're going to do the exact opposite as the way it went in. Put the brackets onto the sway bar and then feed those through the two studs that are protruding from the frame of the car. We're going to go ahead and thread on the nuts, just get them finger tight for now, and then we'll torque them down to somewhere between 13 and 20 foot-pounds. After that, we'll install the end links on each side. Again, get those finger tight and then torque them down somewhere between 32 and 45 foot-pounds. Right, now as you can probably tell, removing this front sway bar is going to be a little bit more difficult than the rear one because it slides in between the subframe and the frame of the car here. Plus you've got all these other pieces that surround it that will make it a little bit more challenging to take out than the rear sway bar. So the first thing that we need to do to remove this front one is remove this lower fender liner right here. There's a number of plastic clips and then some screws on the bottom which require an 8mm socket or a Phillips head screwdriver. And then we want to remove the large splash shield that's underneath the car. This one has a number of plastic clips as well as some 10mm and 8mm screws and bolts as well. Next, we'll need to remove these plastic plates here. There's one on this side and one on the opposite side. It's probably easiest to use a 10mm wrench to get those two bolts off, but this will give us better access to these top bolts for the sway bar brackets, as well as be able to pull the whole sway bar out. We're not just dropping it straight down. Now we need to remove both lower mounts for the radiator. You got one here, and then the same thing on the driver's side as well. We also need to remove this mount here. This is for the lower coolant pipe. And getting under the car here, you really can't see it, but there is a second bolt besides this one for the bracket here that holds this coolant pipe onto the subframe. It's right up here where my finger is touching. Again, you cannot really see it, but you need to remove this bolt as well in order to move this coolant pipe out of the way. And if you have an ND1, you might be able to see it back there. There's a temp sensor plug right back there that we need to disconnect as well. I believe that's only for the ND1s, because that is definitely in the way for us removing this sway bar. And then coming over to the driver's side, you might actually have to get further under the car, but we need to unclip this wiring harness here from the power steering system. It's got one clip down here on the fan shroud, and then one clip on top of this motor itself. Also on the driver's side, be careful removing this bracket. We will have to fish it around this AC line. And once you do that, the AC lines themselves, actually, Flyin Miata says, will be supporting the weight of the radiator. They say it's fine as long as you don't apply any force to the radiator and it just sits there on its own. I did install sway bars on my car and did the same thing, and it was fine, but just be careful while you're doing this process that we don't bend or break any of these lines or wires. All right, now we need to remove the nuts for the end links as well as the brackets for the sway bar itself. Both of these use a 14mm nut. And now with the sway bar loose and somewhat removed, you'll find it's probably easier to access that bolt that's up there for the coolant pipe. So once we get that off and move the coolant pipe here out of the way, we're gonna try to take these brackets here on the end of the sway bar off, so that way we can wiggle it through the car and out through the driver's side. All right, now with everything loose, we can go ahead and remove the sway bar. See how I did take off the metal bracket here for the sway bar itself. Don't worry about the bushings, those are not gonna come off. So we're gonna start taking this bar out actually from the driver's side. And the idea here is to rotate the bar so that these end pieces are pointing towards the front of the car. That will allow us to pull enough this way to clear the subframe. Then we can swing it down, pull it the rest of the way through. It'll go between all the wires and stuff down there, and then rotate it again as we pull it out through the subframe and the frame on the driver's side. All right, and there we have it, one stock sway bar. Now, thankfully, the new one is not gonna have those bushings on it when we go to install it. So we're gonna slide it in the car without those bushings installed, and that hopefully should make it a little bit easier to finagle it into the car. And then we'll get those bushings on once the sway bar is in place. And here we have a comparison of the two front sway bars. There is a bit of a difference there. You can see in the thickness between them. It's not massive, but there is a difference. The Flyin Miata one is also a lot heavier. You could tell it's a lot stiffer, a lot more heavy duty than the stock one. Is a lot lighter than this one here. And then you'll also notice, just like the rear one, that the hole lines up about with the middle one. So that's what we're gonna do for the front one here as well. We're gonna put the end link in this middle hole. Again, for the similar reasons that we did for the rear one. If we go to that end hole here, it's going to reduce the effective stiffness of the bar. And if we go to this one here, we might introduce too much understeer into the car. So we're going to go right there into the middle one for this front bar. And that's actually what Flyin Miata recommends starting with. Again, it'll be pretty easy to change that out later on. The other difference here, you'll notice that both of them do have this hump in the middle. You want to make sure that the hump is pointing up, so it curves upwards when the bar is installed. So this would be the proper orientation here. So make sure you install it the proper way. Again, this is going to go in the exact opposite way that we took out the OEM bar. So go ahead and slide it through from the driver's side. Make sure you be careful of all those wires and hoses, and finagle it over into position as best you can. Well, you could probably tell on camera, but that ended up being a lot easier to get into position, the new one versus the old one. Now, if you remember, we removed the bolt for that coolant pipe, the one that's closer to the back of the car, after we took the original sway bar off. So we want to go ahead and reposition that coolant pipe and install that bolt in the back before attaching the sway bar itself. Again, that way we have access for the tools there. Then we will go ahead and install the sway bar just like we did in the rear. So make sure to apply the grease to the bushings, put the brackets on, and then we'll tighten everything down. We're gonna torque the end links to the same, about 32 to 45 foot-pounds, just like we did in the rear. And then these front ones, the torque spec is 26 to 37 pound-feet, but I don't think I'll be able to get my torque wrench on those bolts, so I'll probably just have to do it by feeling it out with the hand wrench. Now with the sway bar brackets and end links tightened up, we also need to install these stoppers. They install around the front sway bar right outside of each bracket, and they prevent the bar from sliding side to side. Start by getting them around the bar and tightening the bolts just enough to hold it in place, but you can still rotate the stopper by hand. Align the flat section of the stopper with the flat part of the subframe that the sway bar mounts to, and then rotate the top end of the stopper slightly towards the back of the car, leaving a couple millimeters between the subframe and the edge of the stopper. That way, when we lower the car and the suspension is compressed, the front sway bar will rotate up into position and the stoppers will be aligned properly. Hand tighten the bolts before lowering the car using the included Allen wrench, enough so that they grip the bar and keep it in place. Then put everything else back together. All right, and just like that, the Flyin Miata sway bars are installed. So we just have to put the wheels on, and it's time to go take it for a test drive. Alright, so driving the Miata for the first time after installing the Flyin Miata sway bars, and it makes a very noticeable difference. The amount of body roll that you feel while driving the car, slinging it through the corners, is dramatically reduced, and that's not an exaggeration. It is a night and day difference compared to the OEM sway bars. And again, we only have the end links on the middle position for both the front and the rear bar, so we can stiffen it up even more if we want to. But the balance feels the same as it was before as far as the understeer versus oversteer characteristics and the way the car handles. It just corners much more flat than it ever did before. And with that, it feels like the weight transfer in the body is much more controlled than it was with the OEM sway bars. The best part of all of this is that the ride quality itself doesn't seem to have declined at all by installing these sway bars. It feels exactly the same going over bumps. It's just much more controlled and planted in the corners, which is what a lot of folks out there are looking for. And this car in particular is sitting on the Roadster Sport springs with the stock Bilstein dampers. And the sway bars have done way more to reduce body roll than those springs do. My car is on the Öhlins coilovers with the 10 kilogram front springs and 4 kilogram rear springs. So those are a little bit stiffer, especially the front, than what's on this car. And I would still say that the sway bars do more to reduce the body roll than having those stiffer springs did, which makes sense. That's exactly what they're designed to do. Overall, I am extremely happy with these Flyin Miata sway bars. We have had the chance already to drive this car out on some various back roads and Tail of the Dragon and other twisty roads. And again, it is a night and day difference compared to the OEM sway bars. There's just so much more control that you have with these Flyin Miata bars. It really does make a noticeable difference. I would say that these bars are probably one of the best value, if not the best value, in sway bars on the market in terms of price, the construction, what they have to offer. They got the locking collars on the front. They've got 3 adjustments. My Eibach bars, which retail for way more than the Flyin Miata bars, only have 2 adjustments front and back. So I'd say the Flyin Miata bars are definitely the way to go. They're a great value, and they seem to work just as well, if not better, than the Eibach sway bars on my ND. So if you guys are really looking to tame that body roll in your Miata, sway bars are absolutely the way to go. If you're looking for the best bang for your buck handling mod, I would also say that these sway bars are probably the way to go, because again, they don't interfere with the ride quality, but the control while you're cornering is just so much better. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, as always, leave your questions and comments down in the comments section below, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.